Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. That was a very interesting interview. Unfortunately, I will have them back. I could not take your questions. I couldn't open up the lines with Rabbi and Ronya, but they will be back. Now, my next guest is certainly not joining me from Nigeria. You may not have heard his name. Let me tell you his name right. You know, I get excited when there are people that I've always wanted to be in conversation with. He is one of them. Not just because of his views, the robustness, the sharpness, and, you know, somewhat unapologetic, if I may say, but also because he's one of those very, very balanced analysts. Right, let me give you his background. He's a British-Israeli analyst, commentator, author, and former advisor to the Israeli government with expertise on Middle East and the Israel-Palestinian conflict. He was formerly an Israeli negotiator as part of the Taba Summit and the Oslo II peace process. He is currently the president of the U.S. Middle East Project, which is USMEP. His name is Daniel Levy. Daniel, welcome to Borderlines.
Ireti, that was a very kind introduction. It's nice to be with you.
But I mean it. I've actually been wanting to be in conversation with you, especially on this show, because you really do give balance, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So first of all, before we run out of time, the Oslo II peace process, that would be the Arafat peace process. Is that correct?
Ireti, I apologize. Can you rephrase just before? Is that correct?
Yeah. I said, would that be the
hear
Arafat?
Most of what you said. I missed a crucial moment there.
Would that be the Arafat peace process, where Yasser Arafat was involved with Clinton and Ehud Barak?
No. So the Oslo process begins. It's remarkable for me, at least, to think now that this was 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. For a long time, there is no Israeli acknowledgement of the Palestinians. There are discreet talks in the late 1980s, 1988 to be precise. The Palestine Liberation Organization, the National Liberation Movement of the Palestinians, turns around and says, we will accept a Palestinian state on just 22% of the land. We can go back and understand what that means. Alongside Israel, we will recognize Israel. After that, it takes another 5 years before, during the Clinton presidency, Yitzhak Rabin, the name may not be familiar, is then the prime minister of Israel with Arafat, the leader. The beginnings of a peace agreement, but it's an agreement that never gets realized. Negotiations are never completed. Rabin, the Israeli prime minister, within 2.5 years is assassinated by an Israeli Jewish religious extremists. Some years after that, Arafat, having been put under siege by the Israelis in suspicious circumstances, his life ends. And now things couldn't be worse. Yeah.
So this network better not let me down. Otherwise, I should be angry with Zoom and everything Zoom. The reason I'm starting with this is we run out of time very quickly on this show, even though it seems like it's an hour. Talk to me about being part of such a process as Daniel, who was obviously much younger, you know, and negotiating and the intricacies of negotiating such a thing, because I think that is one thing that people are not familiar with.
Yeah, less grey hair. So, look, I'm talking to you today from North London, minutes away from the Arsenal Stadium. I know English football's a big thing. Probably for many of your listeners.
Where are you, North London, did you say?
Reference. Sorry?
Where are you? North London, did you say?
I'm in North London, just a few minutes away from the near Arsenal.
Oh, no way. Okay, we'll talk about that later.
Well, that's maybe another subject.
Are you talking about your? Because I know your dad is a Stokey boy, right? He grew up in Stoke Newington. Yes. Well,
Exactly.
so was my family home in Stoke Newington.
Wow,
But we'll have this
okay.
gist another time. There's so much for us to cover. Go ahead.
So I'm in Islington, just down the road.
Oh,
Listen,
lovely.
I a right that any Jew has around the world. I go to Israel, become an Israeli citizen, and it's actually during my military service over there that I'm first brought in a junior role to be part of the negotiating team when Rabin was still prime minister before that assassination. Later on, I get involved more politically, and I'm in a political appointment, working with the government, first in the prime minister's office, next with the justice minister, involved in what may still be remembered as the closest we came. And this was during the time of Ehud Barak. Arafat is still alive at the time. The closest we came perhaps to sealing this two-state deal. It's at the very end of the Clinton presidency. And what I can say to you is, you have to be able to have some understanding. I'll be honest, for me, it did translate into empathy. But at the very least, one has to have an understanding of what the other side is about, what motivates, what makes that side tick, what they need. And maybe we came close to it then. I would say that since then, we've gone in a very different direction. The realities on the ground, and there's just one really simple fact that it is a fact. It's not a question of interpretation, Ireti. There is a power asymmetry. There is a powerful country with a powerful military that is occupying another people. And so if Israel decides we're going to settle your land, take your land, not agree to terms that could lead to a deal, there's not going to be a deal.
Right.
And that, if I were to really simplify, is where we have gone in the last 2 decades, up to and including the worst of times, which we are in now.
Let's talk about Benjamin Netanyahu. I've watched many of your interviews and and the way you describe him, but you said something about, Israel has a leadership that's offering lies. The whole of the Knesset is in support of the war. Talk to us about Netanyahu and why you think, or why you claim or say that the whole of the Knesset is in support of this current war.
Let me nuance that a tiny bit.
Please do.
Israeli society, Israeli Jewish society, like anywhere, is not a monolith, right? It's not everyone's robotically of one mind. There is a government, there's an opposition. One also has to remember that inside Israel, there is a Palestinian population who are actually citizens of Israel. They don't have equality, but they can serve in the parliament. So first of all, that's one countervailing force. I would argue you used to have a quite robust difference of opinion, also when it came to what to do in the question of the Palestinians, of the territories. Today, you have many differences of opinion inside Israel, much less on this issue. So when it came to a vote just a few days ago in the Israeli parliament, and this is why I've suggested that the support for what Israel is doing in this war, often out of ignorance or indifference to what is being done to Palestinians. But there was a vote just a few days ago to render illegal, to end all cooperation, to prevent the ability to conduct its activities.
Oh, network, don't do this.
UN agency.
Okay.
It's called UN.
UNRWA. Yeah. The line
It's a UN
keeps
agency
freezing.
that is the humanitarian assistance.
Mm-hmm. The line keeps
you good?
freezing. Yes, we're good now. Keep going.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but so you have this UN agency that is in a humanitarian crisis caused by what Israel has done. This agency is the one agency capable of providing the assistance which is trying to keep people alive in really dire circumstances. It also provides healthcare, education, shelter. And Israel has said this agency can no longer operate. And every Zionist member, I use that term because there's Israeli Jewish member who doesn't define himself that way, who voted against, but every Zionist member voted in favor. In July, there was a resolution that said there could be no Palestinian state, something that the rest of the world kind of says it supports. And again, no Zionist member of the Israeli parliament voted against that resolution. No one said yes to a Palestinian state. So I'm afraid that what has happened under Netanyahu is the differences of opinion have become about how he conducts himself. Is he corrupt? Is he trying to change Israeli democracy? Is he controlled by his family? You know, kind of things that aren't that unusual in the political rough and tumble. But the debate has not been about what are the rights of these peoples whose lives we control. There's ceased from being, there has stopped being a real debate in Israel about peace, about justice, about ethics, morals, values. And all of that, of course, has a dramatic effect on the Palestinians, but it also impacts Israeli security, because when you treat another people in this way, this isn't just about Israelis and Palestinians. In any historic situation, if people are denied their basic rights, freedoms, they live under an armed, military, aggressive occupation. They are colonized, so to speak. The colonizer doesn't get security either. Of course, the colonized do not get security. But the Israeli people will not know security as long as they keep Palestinians living in these conditions without rights. And that's why, for me, I always speak to this as a disaster for Palestinians, but also a road to nowhere for Israeli Jews.
Do you think the Israeli public know the full extent of what's going on in Gaza since October 7th?
You asked the full extent of what's going on?
Yes, the full extent of how Israel is executing what it's called its war on Hamas, what a lot of people call the war on Gaza since October the 7th. Do you think the Israeli public know the full, extent of it?
So look, first of all, let's just establish that what the world looked like for Israelis and Palestinians on October the 6th was a pretty normal life for Israelis and a life of occupation and unpredictability and no rights or freedoms for Palestinians. The fact that this was likely to blow up does not justify what happened on October 7th. Crimes were committed, no doubt. What was done on October 7th doesn't justify what has been done ever since. What has been done ever since, increasingly by evidence that the Israelis are providing. They're not intending to, but the self-incriminating statements and social media posts of Israeli soldiers, Israeli leaders. Am I still...
Yes, I can hear you.
Hear me?
Absolutely. We're listening. You have over 1 million Nigerians listening to you, Daniel.
Well, I mustn't waste their time by asking if you can hear me then. I would apologize individually to each of the 1 million listeners, but that may waste our time. I'll apologize collectively.
Yeah.
But your question is a really important one, Ireti, because Look, Israelis like anyone. You don't even need a VPN, right? You don't need to get around a strict censor to be able to access pictures of what is going on there. But if you are an Israeli who exists in a media environment in your native language, your media is both censored and self-censoring. In Israel, there is an atmosphere of a nation mobilized. This is not so unusual. The extent of the crimes committed is unusual. But the idea of a nation mobilized in a time of war behind its troops, and there's enough bad news. Don't say bad things about what we're doing. You don't want people to sympathize with the other side, so don't show what's going on there. So in answer to that question, are Israelis aware? Those who want to be aware are aware. Do the vast majority of Israelis who are not Palestinian, again, there's a distinction to be drawn there. Do the vast majority of those Israelis want to know? No. Some know what's going on. They're pleased with it. They say, great, I want more images of dead, destroyed. It's really a hard thing to say, right? But Israeli soldiers would not be posting these images of, look, we've just blown up another house. Look, we've just killed them. I mean, children burning. I asked my Israeli friends. There was the list of horrendous incidents, which is why this is plausibly a genocide. This is why South Africa has taken this case to the International Court of Justice. It's why the court called for urgent measures. It's why the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor has called for arrest warrants against Israel's leaders. Because the list of terrible things, the destruction of everything, schools, hospitals, mosques, churches, government institutions, homes, 43,000 dead, thousands more likely under the rubble, 16,000 at least of these are children. And then there were the images just recently of people burning to death. And I said to my Israeli friends, you don't have to tell me if you saw the images or not. Are you aware of this? Some, of course, were, but they're my friends, so they would be looking for this. But many others who I spoke to said, no, I don't want to know. I don't need to know. But it's not, again, a society going through this is not that unusual. But I would argue, first of all, if you don't know what's going on, you're really not in a good place to know what to do. And secondly, in a situation like this, the first thing is that those on the outside should be holding you accountable. You should have no choice but to address what's going on, because there is such a thing as international law, as an international court system, and those who are providing you with the weapons should do that with conditions attached. And this is where it can't just be about Israelis and Palestinians and what Israel is doing.
One of the quotes, and I'm going to try and read it out because I wrote it down. You said, this, I think it was on AJ, on Al Jazeera. You said, this is about ideology. You said, this is the moment that you can deal a death blow to the idea of a Palestinian right to equality and aspiration for another generation. You were talking about how, Netanyahu and the majority of the Knesset said. I'd like you to unpack that for us, please. Did I quote you correctly, by the way? Because I wrote it down. Sometimes I can't read my own handwriting.
No, I lost you for 5 seconds.
Okay, should I read it out? Should I read it again?
Just the bit from this is a death knell to the idea of.
Yeah, this is the moment that you can deal a death blow to the idea of a Palestinian rights, equality, and aspiration for another generation. Effectively meaning another Nakba.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So what I am arguing there is the idea that this is an operation with military goals. This is exclusively about dismantling the threat from a group which undertook an action which was extremely painful for Israelis. And therefore, Israel is trying to achieve a security goal And that's what it boils down to. That idea does not stand the test of what is going on and what is being done. Because virtually any security person that has their head screwed on will tell you, we can deliver some battlefield successes. You have to tell us what you want the political outcome to look like. What do you want this to look like on the day after? Who do you want to be in charge? Do you want us to be in charge permanently? How do you want these people to live? Let's say we do manage to defeat this group. What happens next? And the thing that we have not had an answer to is that question. And there's some politics involved in that. Of course there is. Netanyahu has a coalition. There are more hardline factions. His own faction is very hardline. They are very open in telling us what they want. They want the physical removal of the Palestinians. There are plans put forward by Israeli government ministries to push the Palestinians into Egypt, to push them into Jordan. But it's not just political coalition allies. It's not just that Netanyahu has been prime minister for an awfully long time. He's the longest serving prime minister. He's not someone new on the scene. He also has serious legal troubles in Israel. He's up in court on 4 charges. He sees the war as a way to maybe revive his political fortunes. But what I'm suggesting is it's not just those things. This can only be understood in the context of whatever the original ideas behind having a Jewish state, having Zionism, the practice, the actual existing manifestation for decades has been that this comes at the expense of Palestinians. Palestinians are expelled, displaced, their land is taken, but this is zero sum. And we are now at what feels like, and I'm not saying there were never countervailing trends. There were countervailing trends. We just talked about those peace talks. But at the moment, we're on a very relentless march in one direction only. And that is about how do we remove the Palestinian ability to live on this land, because the level of destruction, it's not serving a military goal. It's not going to work militarily. It can't be explained in exclusive military terms. And that's why one needs to understand and challenge what else is going on here. And what is going on here is also ideology. And sadly, it's not just Netanyahu. It goes much deeper into the body politic and into the history.
Now, we'll go back to Israel later. Let's talk about Hamas. Yahya Sinwar was just recently killed by Israel. How would you define Yahya Sinwar and Hamas? 36 or so countries prescribe them as a terrorist organization. The others prescribe them as a resistance group, etc. Nigeria, they're not a terrorist organization. So talk to me, unpack, in your informed opinion, Yahya Sinwar and Hamas.
Yeah, and let me start in this definition bit, and then if I can kind of then come across to, so what are they? I don't find the language of terrorism very useful when one is talking about what are ultimately national political struggles. So for me, what matters is Hamas violating international law? Yes, it has. Therefore, they have to desist from violating international law. Likewise, I don't find it useful to call Israel a terrorist state. Is Israel violating international law? If it is, yes, it is. Then it has to be in line with international law, because terror is always in the eye of the beholder. I think there are instances where that definition can be applied, and I know that in Nigeria you have and continue to go through situation there, which I won't relate to. So, in the Palestinian national struggle, you have had this historic divide between the main movement, which has led the Palestinian national struggle. It's called Fatah. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a secular liberation movement. They were also called terrorists. They were brought in just as the IRA, just as Umkhonto Isiswe in South Africa. Yeah, the Viet Cong. We're very used to this modus operandi. They make the deal with Israel. They recognize Israel. They accept Israel. They set up a Palestinian Authority. They do security cooperation. What they get is more and more illegal Israeli settlements, less peace, worse conditions for Palestinians. Throughout this time, there is a challenge from an Islamist movement, Hamas. But Hamas isn't, I would argue, and experts on Hamas, not Hamas people, but the people who follow this closely. Hamas is part of the national Palestinian movement and struggle. On several occasions, they have led efforts to unify. They have said, you know what? We will accept an outcome that Palestinians see as acceptable. They have, of course, negotiated with Israel in the past. There have been prisoner releases. There have been ceasefires. Many of those same Western states have informal dialogues, reach outs, people who are there, non-declared envoys to Hamas, as well they should have if they're being responsible political shepherds of an attempt to secure peace. Hamas changed its charter. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't know yet what will be the outcome as we look back from history on October 7. We do know, again, that it has come at a huge price for Palestinians. Itself, the acts were illegal, but this is a fight also inside the Palestinian body politic. I think that you will need to bring Hamas into the fold if you're going to have political understandings in the future. What we do know, and you asked about Yahya Sinwar.
Yeah.
What we do know is that he has apparently become a much more important figure in his death than he was in his life. Because, and this isn't, the Palestinians idealized death or blood. That's a terrible caricature. It would be the wrong caricature to make of any people. But we do know that the circumstances of his death, and bizarrely, a video that Israel circulated, and people may not have seen this, but in the Arab-speaking world and beyond, this has a virality which most social media influencers could only dream of. This video of him resisting a drone that's flying, waving his hand till the last moment. This creates a martyrology, a mythology around the man, which, again, it's not to endorse what he did, but it's to recognize a reality of what it means to be in a struggle that involves armed resistance. And here you have a real, I think, parting of the ways. I think many in the West look at this and see brown, Arab, Islamic terrorist. That's the only frame through which they can see this. And many elsewhere see resistance, liberation, struggler in that tradition. I would argue that where on that spectrum you position him matters less than what does one do politically going forward. And it's very clear that politically going forward, you need, as in most political struggles, you need to bring a significant part of the people who have taken up arms, but they've taken up arms to achieve political goals. You need to bring them into the process. Hamas will not be defeated. It is because of what Israel has done in response. It is more popular today. And that is the reality that one will have to deal with.
Right. I know they want to call. You will be able to call 0201-277-0993. You should have sent a WhatsApp whilst you were listening to myself and Daniel converse. 0809-597-5805. The female-only line is 0201.
You ask a lot from your listeners. They have to multitask.
They have because they take over the show. You don't even know. When I open this thing, you and I will not be able to talk. They're literally my co-hosts. You have no idea, Daniel. But before I go to the calls, can you hear me? Because it's now frozen, right? Before I go to the calls, let me bring this to you. You said the U.S. is not a friend of peace. U.S. is not going to deliver, and U.S. is not the only player. Before I open up the lines to my listeners, I would like you again to unpack, I know I've just paraphrased you there, those three lines, to unpack that, especially juxtaposed against a possible re-President Trump or a President Kamala Harris.
And as different as they are, and as, almost binary as that choice is to most Americans and all of us outside of America watching this and catching up on sleep in advance of Tuesday night, on this issue, I fear that there will be more continuity than change, whoever is in the White House next January. And I say that with regret. And I say that because there are deeper structural factors here. Now, I think President Biden has been, as a Democrat president in the third decade of the 21st century, something of a dinosaur on this issue. To be a Democrat president that still is so indifferent to your own base, your own voters, to how they see this issue, let alone how international law, how morality, how if you claim to be the upholders of a certain rules-based order. Biden has in his mind, it seems, an idea of Israel which bears no resemblance to the reality. But if I park the person of Biden, which has been important, there are political factors here. We all know about how the American system operates, the role of lobbies. This isn't about singling out a particular lobby. We know the role of the gun lobby, and we know the role of the evangelical lobby and the Israel lobby and the etc. Pharmaceutical lobby. So those impose structural restrictions, I think, on what one can expect from American politics. But there's more going on here. This is also geopolitical. And I think America has looked at this and it has said, between looking bad internationally, because if you remember, for a year or more, for decades, but especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, America stood on its moral soapbox and wagged its finger at the world and said, why aren't you doing more? Nigeria, why aren't you doing more? Everyone, why aren't you doing more? This is your struggle as well. And everyone said, okay, we kind of don't think that that's actually how you operate. You're very selective about these things, but maybe we've got short memories. Maybe you are always consistently good about international law. Along comes Gaza. Along comes the litany of Israeli crimes. And America basically says, forget all of that stuff. They don't even try and wag the finger really anymore. We're going to provide cover for Israel, provide arms for Israel, align with Israel's narrative. And that's a cost that America absorbs. But I think America has basically said to itself, Israel is our guy. We can't have our ally being weakened. This is a world in which we want to focus on the Asia-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific. We want Israel there to help manage West Asia, the Middle East, North Africa. with some Arab allies. They're testing out some weapons which we might want to use in the future. They're doing some things which we might want to do in the future. Some of them we've done in the past, mostly in parts of the world that aren't full of white people, if I can say that. And so there's a geopolitics here. I think it's a mistake by the US. I hope that a combination of American domestic politics and people on the outside saying, this isn't good enough. You can't come and wag your finger at us. In fact, we have an interest in an international architecture, into a rules-based world. You kept telling us it was important. Actually, it's important for us. It's important for the world that we live in. Therefore, we need you to be responsible players in this arena. And you can't be responsible if you're going to continue to do what you're doing. And the sad truth is that the US has the most influence. US could influence this. It has the potential leverage. And the sad truth is that while they think they're being the most pro-Israel they could possibly be, actually they're encouraging Israel down a cul-de-sac, down an alley that there's no way out. Because if you tell the Israelis, we don't think what you're doing is good, but if you carry on doing it, we'll support you anyway. We'll give you the arms anyway. Then it encourages Israel to do its worst, and it encourages something called moral hazard, where a small country, which actually doesn't have the luxury of being America, surrounded by Canada and Mexico and the ocean, and America, which has by far the largest military in the world.
Okay.
Israel doesn't have that luxury. And if Israel continues down this path, it is endangering itself, and America is encouraging that in what I would consider to be deeply irresponsible ways.
I have a question on WhatsApp, and I'm coming to the calls, but let me ask this question because like I said to you, I did give you the opportunity to send it to WhatsApp. There's no name to this. It says, I'd like to know what Mr. Levy thinks of what the rabbi said about the UN being corrupt and responsible for rape, based on the conversation with your previous guest. Does Israel want peace? I don't know whether you were able to listen to my interviews before you, but I had a rabbi here who did say that about the UN.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here, and I apologize, Ireti, and to the rabbi that I wasn't able to follow the earlier conversation. A particular charge against the UN agency, which we were discussing earlier, this UNRWA, UNRWA, Israel claimed, and the Western media lapped it up. In our conversation earlier about the media, the other thing that we didn't acknowledge, and it's really important to acknowledge, of course, is that they don't have people in Gaza. All of the mainstream Western media have made it a conscious choice. They have said, we will not use local stringers. We won't have Palestinians on the ground. We're not going to challenge Israel and say, we will withdraw our journalists from Israel if you don't let us put journalists in Gaza. So the entirety of the Western media does not have people. They have people embedded in Israel. They have no one in Gaza. Al Jazeera and others do have people there and have lost 175 journalists, I think, have been killed. So anyway, just parking that. This UN agency, there is a particular claim that was made, that was lapped up, that 9 of the, I think it's 30,000 plus, but I'd have to check that number.
UNRWA staff,
UNRWA staffing were involved in Hamas. Immediately, a number of Western countries, led by the US, suspended their financial assistance at the most terrible of times. UNRWA said, show us the evidence. Where is the evidence? No evidence, no evidence. The UN eventually sets up a commission of inquiry. I thought it was problematic because they put the former French foreign minister in charge of this team of inquiry. They used basically 3 Western institutions to support it. And that inquiry, led by former French Foreign Minister Colonna, comes up and says the Israelis have not provided the evidence. They've made this claim. The claim has been repeated in a huge echo chamber, not just by the rabbi who was your guest, who I'm sure just heard these accusations. And when they're made repeatedly, they sound credible. That there was no evidence, and literally in dozens of pages, they list the mechanisms that UNRWA has put in place to make sure that this can't happen and to make sure that corruption inside that institution. So this is a spurious claim. Now, by the way, have UN so-called peacekeeping forces in other parts of the world been involved in bad things? Yes, and we have that documented. Mm-hmm. This particular claim, I think, is designed to discredit the UN in this respect. Mm-hmm. And does Israel want peace?
Yes, I'm going to give you. No, you need to literally finish. The lines are going. I'm literally almost out of time. I wished I had locked you down for 2 hours. They're all calling now. Does Israel want peace? Yes or no?
Look, it's not a yes or no question.
Okay.
Because Israel's
it's
not a
30 seconds respond. 30 seconds.
The 30-second response is the publicly stated positions of Israel's leadership and the policies in practice that we see are incompatible, simply do not align with the idea that Israel wants peace. And I very much hope that one day I'll be able to give a radically different answer to that question.
Brilliant. I'm going to the calls now. Hello. Be very, very quick. Good afternoon. Your name?
It's Komoko.
Yes. Yes, good evening.
I want to ask Mr. Daniel a question. Mm-hmm. Why did the late Imam Hassan al-Banna say, I will obsolete and I will sink Israel? Why did they say that?
Okay. No. You only get one question, Koboko. Okay. We don't have time. Thank you.
What is United about the nation? United Nation Day and
no. Koboko, you've got. I don't know whether you heard that. Let me go to the next one. It was very hard.
Struggling.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead. Your name, where you're calling from, and your question, please, very quickly.
So I was very painful that we couldn't ask question the first show before now. Okay, my question.
One question, yeah.
Yes. Last week we had a lady from Afghanistan who, Taliban. I'm going to the question. So Taliban has the ideology of taking the rights for the women, the humanized women, and all that. Don't you think Hamas has the same ideology, Hamas and Hezbollah?
Okay.
That Israel is trying to fight against that because Israel is like.
Okay, no, I hear you. What you're saying is, does Hamas have the same ideology as the Taliban? Correct? Thank you. And Hezbollah. Thank you. So, Daniel, you write that down and I'll come to you. Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Please get away from that echo very quickly.
This is Chris calling from Ikeja.
Your question, please.
Yes, I want to ask my question about what your guest said concerning South Africa taking Israel to court. So now I want to know the position of the British government about what is going on. Because they are not doing anything concerning the situation.
Thank you. And the last one I'm going to take, Daniel, and I'll give you 2 minutes to respond. Hello.
Hello, Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Go ahead, please. Your name and where you're calling from and your question, please.
Titi Lokwe is calling you from.
One question, Titi Lokwe.
No problem. Can we see Netanyahu one day standing in the dock, whether in Israel for his corruption charges or at the International Criminal Court for war crime?
Okay. Thank you. Right. So you've got like 4 there, and I'm only going to. I can literally only be kind and give you 2 minutes. He said, "Do you see Netanyahu?" The first one I couldn't make out either, but it was something to do with an imam. But I couldn't make it out either.
Okay,
go ahead.
We're going to have to apologize that we can't address that.
Yes, that's one of our regular callers, but I couldn't make out what he was saying either.
So apologies to your regular call. Right. Quickly. Taliban, Hamas, Hezbollah, women. I am familiar with a position across a number of religions that does not accord equality to women. It's true in Jewish ultra-Orthodox circles. It's true in some, at least, not all Jewish ultra-Orthodox circles, true in some Islamist circles. And I think that's true inside Hamas as well, okay, and inside Hezbollah. My argument would be we have to work with that reality.
Right.
If we're going to make things better in Afghanistan, we have 2 options. We can either work with the reality of a Taliban in power or 2 decades of failed military attempts to replace the Taliban, where we put in place even more corrupt people. I'm saying we now, someone who's sitting in the West, failed. So if you want to drive change, the change is going to come from inside Palestinian society. It's going to be Palestinian women who are part of the Hamas movement who are going to drive that change. Second question.
The
British position the Brits have not submitted a position to the International Court of Justice, either in support or refuting the South African position. A number of states have. Britain is not one of them. The British Foreign Secretary made a problematic statement the other day saying, we can't call this a genocide. He didn't justify it at all, let alone under international law. Why that's not the case. The previous government of Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives did appeal to the International Criminal Court to not weigh in, to not be involved, to not issue an arrest warrant against Netanyahu, but the Labour government has withdrawn that. And lastly, do you ever see?
Yes, in court, yes.
Yeah, Netanyahu is already in court inside Israel. One of the reasons he wants to continue this war is it's the best way of. It's literally his get out of jail card. Okay, if he continues the war, he thinks he can continue to survive and even thrive politically. But he is in court in Israel. He could serve time in Israeli prison. Will we see him in an international war crime tribunal? I think it's unlikely, but I think it's crucial that that case move forward, because if the International Criminal Court is to finally show the world that it doesn't just exist for enemies of America and for people from the global South to be tried, then it has to show that when an ally of America commits war crimes, those crimes can also be tried. So we need to at least move forward with that effort.
Okay, right. Let me answer more calls. See, I'm trying to squeeze them all in.
You're doing amazing.
Hello.
Good evening,
Good evening. Your name, quickly, your question.
You have Emmanuel on the line.
Emmanuel, go ahead.
Allow me to ask more than one question.
No, one question, please. The lines are going off.
Okay. There are this group of protesters springing up, including this popular woman, this Jewish woman, who are saying they should chase away the Palestinians.
Daniel Wise, yes.
Chase away, to grab it, to get land. What's the view of your guest on that?
Okay. No. You can only get one question. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have time. And Daniel is extremely popular. I literally can't keep up with all the calls. Hello?
Steven?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Please, my name is Christopher Anemeke.
Go ahead, very quickly, please.
Please, I want to know, when will this war end?
Okay, thank you. When will the war end? Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Your question, please.
Okay, my simple question is, what of Hamas? What can they just come out and tell Palestinians that they need peace? Release the ones they have. So peace will become me.
Okay, so what you're saying, no, please. What you're saying is, what about Hamas? Why can't they come and tell the world that they want peace, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, I'm going to give you a minute for all of those, because honestly, I want to fit in as many as possible. The lines are still going crazy.
What did Ramim ask? What did the first caller ask? Because I didn't catch it. I think it was Ramim.
Oh gosh, it's gone out of my head.
About some movement, some Jewish movement.
Yes, Daniel Wise. You know Daniel Wise, the head of the settler.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you have a movement that has been indulged by every Israeli government of every political color, which has established settlements which are categorically, there's no question about this, illegal under international law in an occupied territory. That's who Daniela Weiss is. They are now telling us, with the support of many members of the governing party, that their intention is to re-establish settlements in Gaza. What we see in northern Gaza, I urge people to look this up, as painful as it is. The images that Israel is not allowing aid in, it's going even worse than it's done elsewhere in Gaza right now. It's trying to remove people from northern Gaza. And apparently the goal of this movement, not yet formally adopted by the government, but supported by many in the government, is to establish Jewish illegal settlements on the rubble of the ethnically cleansed northern Gaza.
Okay.
Secondly, when will the war end? Look, these things are normally a function of either far-sighted politicians saying, okay, now I have to translate this into a political win, or a function of pressure, or a function of exhaustion and attrition. The Israeli side is, again, the more powerful party. This is largely going to be determined by an Israeli decision. You don't have an Israeli political leadership with that vision. And at the moment, you don't have the pressure. So at the moment, most of this is being decided by a battlefield balance of forces, where Israel has caused great destruction, but it hasn't actually yet delivered security for its people. It hasn't got its hostages back. It's still under missile fire from Lebanon. So at the moment, attrition seems to be the way towards ending this, but I hope that eventually we'll have either far-sighted political leadership or external pressure. Why doesn't Hamas simply say, we believe in peace? I think Hamas would say that's exactly what the other guys, what Fatah, what the PLO turned around and did. They gave up their arms. They recognized Israel. They did security cooperation, and things got worse. Well, that's the internal logic. And they would probably, not just them, others would probably say, why can't both sides say they want peace? But yes, it would, a strategy that holds out. This is the alternative we are looking for. That's really important. Israel has said, the guidelines of this government in Israel are, we intend to resettle, that this land is for Jews only. What we need is a Palestinian position that says, a bit like in South Africa, there is a place for Israeli Jews in the rainbow equality, democratic future that we envisage.
Okay, so I've got my final question to you because I've only got a minute and a half or so. On IPI, the question, they talk about a land for all, right? Which I believe you were on last month. But I'm going to ask you, 2 states, 1 state, or a land for all. I noticed in that conversation that you weren't fully convinced of what they were saying. I'm going to give you, I don't even know how long I'm going to give you. We just don't have the time, Daniel. You've just got to come back. 30 seconds, they're telling me. Oh, Lord.
Okay. I would say this. There cannot be a zero-sum outcome. Palestinians cannot be removed from their land. They cannot be kept in apartheid conditions without rights, without equality, without statehood. Partition has not worked. Could it work one day? Maybe, but it has not worked. It has encouraged ethnic cleansing and sectarianism and land grabs.
Okay.
Israeli Jews cannot be removed from the land. So what we need to do is create the conditions.
Right.
And crucial to creating those conditions, my last sentence, is Israelis have to understand that the incentive structure is different, that there is a cost, and then maybe Israelis will offer a different future. Thank you so much, Ireti.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. You're coming back very, very soon, I promise you. We have too much to discuss. Have a fabulous weekend. Say hi to Corbin in Islington. You're in Corbin land.
I'll say hi to Stokey as well.
Exactly. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's the end of Borderlines, Lagos, Nigeria, Ramallah, Israel, wherever you're listening from. I'm out of time. Goodbye and have a wonderful weekend.
Markets for you.
My kids. 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.